Hello everyone, I'm Kaylin as always, and welcome back to Tea Time Thoughts. I'm re-recording this introduction a bit, so I'm sorry if anything sounds a little bit different, but I wanted to talk about the movie 1917, directed by Sam Mendes, and I'm recording this sort of just after the Oscars, so I'm a bit salty that this movie didn't place, but it did win Best Cinematography, which I was very happy about because the movie was designed to make it look like it was all taken in one shot, and it was absolutely genius. I was in awe of how it turned out, and I was one happy camper. I thought that this was all very well done and very good. I really love when a movie has very carefully detailed and thought out cinematography. I think sometimes it can be an overlooked aspect of a movie. I think that a lot of work really does go into making the perfect shot or setting things up in a way to further the story, but I think so often we're either caught up in the story or the acting that we forget about the importance of setting up for the perfect shot and creating the perfect background for the story to take place. And I think that's something that 1917 did just a phenomenal job of. And to start off with my little list of notes here, the basic premise of the movie is that two young men, Blake and Schofield, have been tasked with delivering a message to another sector of the British Army to call off an attack on the German forces. And if they fail, then they'll essentially lose about 1,600 men. So they have a great responsibility to take care of this, and Blake especially has a very large personal investment in this mission because the army that is being sent off to fight is the same army that his brother is in. And if he doesn't get there in time to deliver this message, then his brother's going to die as well. And he brings Schofield along with him to help with this mission. And one thing I loved in particular, there's this bit of dialogue between the two as they kind of progress on their mission. Schofield's telling Blake about a medal he won during the Battle of the Somme, which was one of the most significant battles during World War I, and also one of the most tragic battles as well. He tells Blake that the medal he won for fighting in that battle, he traded with a French man for a bottle of wine. And Blake's just astounded by this. He can't wrap his head around the idea that Schofield would just so easily give up something that seems like such a great honor. But in essence, Schofield tells Blake that the medal is just nothing but a piece of ribbon and a scrap of tin. And he starts to tell Blake that when he last went home and was with his family after that, well, he didn't want to leave, but he doesn't finish his point or the story, and he just starts to well up with tears, and he stops talking and just carries on. And in my head, I was preparing myself for this great speech about how a little scrap of ribbon can't replace the lives that have been lost or something. And we don't really get anything like that. And it just sort of left me thinking, well, what does this mean? What are we supposed to get from it? And one thing that I kind of took away from the movie is that not every soldier has this grand hero's tale that we see so often portrayed in media or portrayed in these grand stories. And there are stories out there like that, and they are phenomenal. But for so many men that were out fighting these wars and these battles, all they wanted to do was just to survive and get home and see their families again and just be able to see the war to its end. They weren't looking for some grand glory or accomplishment. They just were doing their duty for their country, for the people that they loved, and they just wanted to get it over with and go home. And one thing that's important to note too, I feel like especially in the United States, we overlook how crucial and how significant World War I really was. Initially, the war was estimated to only last a few months or so, but it ended up dragging on for about 4 years. And for Europe, it was just absolutely catastrophic. There were so many young men of like a promising and new generation that were lost and wouldn't be able to fulfill the ambitions that a young man in any other generation should get to fulfill. They had given up their lives for this terrible war because we had progressed so much as a race and we had created so many cruel inventions that helped progress the speed with which you could kill an enemy. And this really made the war so much more catastrophic than other people could have ever imagined. Prior to World War I, wars in essence were almost seen as like not necessarily a gentleman's duty, but it was very much, there's a phrase in Latin I'm blanking on. Oh, well, if you've heard the phrase dulce et decorum, it's part of a Latin phrase which translates to "it's sweet to die for one's country." And prior to that, war had been viewed with such honor and such dignity, and war was a way for people to progress in their lives, to gain rank. If anyone's seen Hamilton, that's what Hamilton was so obsessed with during the American Revolution. He wanted so desperately to fight and to lead men so that he could rise above his station after the war and make something of himself. But after World War I, it became very clear that this war was so much greater than anybody could have expected. With all the new types of weapons and stuff that had been created, it was so much easier to make war about death and destruction than it had been about honor. And another thing that this movie did such a fantastic job on was really displaying the horrors of the trenches. People would fight in the trenches and struggle to maintain their ground and even gain like so much as a few inches. And because men would, be shot above the trenches and stuff, and because it was so dangerous to go up and try to bury the dead soldiers, the bodies would often just be left there. So while Blake and Schofield are crossing through these lines, you see corpses of fallen soldiers in various stages of decay. Like some are fresh, some are just skeletons, some have clearly been there much longer than other ones, and there are dead horses and other animals and things like that. And it's definitely something that's unsettling to see, but I'm also a big believer in the idea that being unsettled, especially in a safe environment, such as through reading a book or watching a movie, I think that's something that is important. I think that we shouldn't be sugarcoating how terrible this war really was and how awful it was to live through it. And I think that even though it is just a movie and we can't see or know what it was really like to be in the trenches at that time, I think that it was really important for them to display the war in such a way because it gives us more of an understanding and perhaps more sympathy for not only Schofield and Blake, but for the soldiers on both sides of the war that had gone through such a terrible thing. And I'm not going to give away any particular plot points of the story. I was very grateful that I didn't know anything about the story going in, and I was able to just react to everything in full time and stuff. I honestly left the theater just practically speechless. I was in such awe. Oh my gosh, I'm getting all excited again just thinking about it. It was easily one of the best movies I've ever seen in a long time, if not one of the best movies I've ever seen. I love having discussions about movies. I'm one of those people that sometimes likes to talk through movies, so I'm one of those people that, you'd probably get annoyed with, but I really enjoy having these deep discussions about movies and being able to sort of see how other people interpreted the film that they saw versus the film that I saw, because no two people ever see the same thing. Like no two people ever read the same book or hear the same song. The way people envision things and the images and thoughts that are drawn up in their heads are never going to be the same as the person next to them. So I always love to see the perspectives of others around me. But after this movie, I really had to just kind of stop and think about things. It wasn't really something where I could just talk to somebody right away afterwards. I really had to just kind of sit and think about what everything could have meant, not just, I wouldn't say what it does mean, because that's the beauty of really any form of art, is that it can mean so many different things. But if it's still in theaters by the time you're listening to it, definitely go give it a watch. And, even if it's not, like, go download it, go rent it. I'm not going to encourage piracy or illegal streaming. Just, go check this out sometime if you're comfortable with it. If you're not comfortable with viewing that's okay. Everybody's at their own level of what they're comfortable with and what they'd be okay watching. I personally really enjoy history, as we all know, so this was something that I was very invested in watching. But if you're not very comfortable watching that, then just, give this a listen. I'll tell you some of the stuff that I got out of it, and you can do with that as you want. Do with that as you will. Something like that. So another little thing that I noticed that I thought was very smart, I noticed something a little bit like this in Dunkirk as well. England during this time was a very large colonial power, and At one point, Schofield is in a truck with some other soldiers in another unit, and one of the soldiers is an Indian man, and I wanted to like learn a little bit more about him, be like, oh, does he have this big story? What's his name? You know, da 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 da. And one thing to note is that British rule in India began around the mid 19th century and ended in 1947, but British involvement in India had gone on a lot longer than that. But I really enjoyed this representation of colonialism, even for just a short while in this movie, because that's not only a significant part of British history, it's a significant part of Indian history as well. And having that representation really kind of helped to solidify how widespread it was. As I mentioned with Dunkirk as well, with some of the French soldiers, there were soldiers from the French colonies in Africa as well that were serving with the French army. And I love seeing little snippets of things like that because I think that is a part of history that isn't really as far away as we think it is. And there are so many countries in Africa, you know, thinking specifically about French rule, but also so many countries just worldwide that are still kind of dealing with the consequences of imperialism and colonialism. And seeing this definitely impressed me. And back to the cinematography, oh, there's this one scene. I was just, oh my goodness, I loved this when I was in the theater. It just completely blew me away. So there's this scene where Schofield's running through the burning remains of this French village, and he's walking into this courtyard, and the whole background is just illuminated with like bright orange flames, and there's a fountain, and you get a side view of the fountain. And at first I thought that he had like stumbled through like some altar in the middle of this village square, but then I looked and I was like, oh wait, it's a fountain. But from the side view of this structure, it looks like an altar with a large crucifix. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is very rich. That has so many different layers to it, because if we look beyond just the physical aspect of what's going on in that moment, it's just, oh my gosh, this is so interesting, you guys. I loved this, and I loved digging into this a little bit more. Not only is this town burning, but with this fountain looking like, you know, a symbol of God, it's very symbolic of what's going on in the world during that time. This war was so catastrophic, it caused so many people to question their faith, to really wonder if what was going on was a sign that they had fallen from God's light, or if it was a sign that God didn't exist at all. And that also kind of leads into the explanation of the cynicism that we see following World War I as we enter into the 1920s. And we have kind of this explosion of art from all across the world that digs into the concept of, I guess it sort of depends on the different facets of art that you're looking at, because one thing that definitely comes to mind is Dadaist art, and I have varying feelings on Dadaism. I am not personally a fan of the artwork itself, but I really enjoy the meaning behind it, because if anyone's seen Tom Stoppard's play Travesties, it's one of my favorites. I might do an episode on this in the future, but I'd probably want to read it through again so I could come up with some more insights. I saw the play in New York back in May 2018 with my friend Haley, and there is a lot of depth to it, and I think it's something that it really helped to see it portrayed live in front of me so I could get an idea of the story. But I think now that I've seen it, I need to go through and read it and develop some more interpretations on my own. But Tristan Tzara, he was one of the leading Dadaist artists. He's also one of the main characters in the play. And this play also takes place in 1917 in Switzerland. And he discusses with the main character quite a lot about the importance of art. And he says that art should be made by chance and not on purpose. And the whole idea behind the Dadaist movement is that if art is so significant to the world, then this traditional, beautiful art that people have spent a lot of time and purpose creating can lead to a war as devastating as World War I, then art needs to change so the world can change. And what's fascinating about that is not only does it place a really great emphasis on art, but because art is so often intertwined with life, the idea of chance and kind of letting things happen as they will was really quite common in the post-war scene. That's why, we see so much skepticism. We see kind of a loss of hope in works of art like The Great Gatsby or works by Ernest Hemingway, who I'm also not a fan of. But seeing that fountain resembling the shape of a crucifix, it really kind of brought on that deep layer and level of what was going on. And by the end of the movie, as Schofield furthers his efforts on the mission, he really doesn't receive any reward for his efforts. And the end scene, as we see him, we usually expect these great, swelling music scores to say, oh yes, our main character has survived. We have our hero here, and he's done this great work, and he's made it, and now he's going to be adored, and he's going to live this wonderful life. But we don't get a conclusion like that. We don't really get that closed ending where we can just really come to peace with everything. And it does leave you wondering, but at the same time, I found that very fitting for the story, because I feel like a lot of the media that we receive, we are very used to getting a closed ending. Especially in the movies that we see, we can usually guarantee in a Marvel movie or something that the plot will continue the same way and that the heroes probably win at the end. Now, I haven't seen any of the recent movies, so if that trend's been broken, then please don't come at me. I'm just kind of using this in general. We don't really get this poetic justice that we always seem to search for in the stories that we consume. It's just this man trying to do the best that he can and just thinking about his family and wanting all of this to end so he can go home. And I think that's ultimately one of the things that the movie was trying to show, is that we idolize these points in history so much, but not everybody is a hero, and not every hero gets the credit that they deserve. So often people are just trying to survive and do the best that they can. And some people are very brave, and some people can go above and beyond. And I have all the admiration in the world for people who can summon up the courage to go forth and do these heroic things, to go on daring rescues, to deliver these messages, to put their lives on the line for something greater than themselves. But that's not the story of every person. The story of every person is just somebody who wants to be safe and wants to be loved and wants peace in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's world peace or internal peace, it can be as simple as that. It doesn't always have to be a grand, heroic rescue or survival. Sometimes it just comes down to one person trying to do their best. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on 1917 and a little bit of my thoughts on, the Art Deco movement and World War I. So yeah, it was really nice to record this. As soon as I saw the movie, I really wanted to discuss this out loud and really kind of see where my ideas would take me, because I think a lot of people are like this, where if they start to talk out loud, more ideas will kind of come to them as they go. That's why sometimes when I'm trying to figure something out, I'll say things aloud. A lot of the people that are close to me can attest to this, but it really helps to, just vocalize things sometimes. I will be recording another episode soon. I haven't figured out quite which topic I'll be doing next, but I have... Oh, there's my phone. I have quite a few different things in mind that I'd like to discuss or talk about, so there's no shortage of things really to discuss, but it's just a matter of figuring out what to do next. So in the meantime, thank you for listening to me. I'm Kaylin, and this is Tea Time Thoughts. I'll see you guys next time.